So as a texture study using this resource picture, this image has some really cool mesh web woven textures. And the first thing that I would do is compare what the overall value is compared to that value scale. So I think in general it's somewhere around a value 3 or 4. And so I would start by just blocking in that nice base value. That gets you a good start and it lays in some color. That way it's not just the white of the paper. And I like to use the side of my pencil lead to do that. You can wear down a nice flat edge on a scrap sheet of paper and hold your pencil way far to the back. And shading in a couple different directions can help you get that smooth shading. And I'm going to use that top edge right there to represent where that other shoe overlaps it, just to help give me an edge to frame everything on. And using a Q-tip, I like to blend and soften all that shading first, just to smooth it out. The next thing that I notice is that that top shoe is casting a shadow onto the other shoe. So I'm going to block in where those darker values are before I start to do any more sort of details. This is going to really help start to set up that value structure and help me work very general to specific. So now that that basic structure is set up, now I can start thinking about the path and the direction that all of those little tiny dots in the mesh are creating. I see that there are rows of the widest sections of the dashes that I can sort of very lightly block in, and I think I'll use that to help me anchor and figure out where all these little sections should go. And using just a mechanical pencil or a regular pencil, I'm going to start by blocking in that first row. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to get every single one exactly where it goes, but I'm going to use that to help me anchor the basic structure of my pattern. That way it kind of feels like I'm creating that impression. So that's going to help start to establish those textures. And I see that at the top, the next sort of rows create curved shapes where they blend together. And then as you move down, they become more separated and individual. And some of them are squared off and some are more like rounded. And I can use a Q-tip to help me sort of soften those. That way they don't become too defined. And just to mimic that texture as much as I can. And this whole process took me about half an hour to do this one section. So that kind of shows you this video is going very, very fast. Another thing that you can do is to take an eraser and lightly sort of tap to erase out where you see ridges or highlights on those shoes. That can help you bring back in some of the lighter values if anything gets too dark. And this process is really very much about layering. You're not going to get it to look good in just one layer of pencil. It's really much more about starting with a base value and adding some textures and adding some shadows and some highlights and working back and forth to create that realism. Here I'm starting to work on the bottom part of the shoe where you can see that nice value contrast there. I don't want to have a dark outline in between those edges. Nothing really has a black outline around it, so instead I'm just letting that value and that shading come right up to the edge and then contrast against that much lighter value next to it. And so that's just a really quick example of kind of trying to match textures by layering in different layers of your graphite. It's much easier if you break it down and look at the simple stuff first and then gradually build your way up to where you have those textures.